That may be listening. My name's David Young. I'm a member of the Boot Brisbane team up here in Cairns. And with me this evening is Bill Bates, the head coordinator of the Boot Brisbane campaign. Good evening, Bill.
Good evening, David.
And our special guest for this evening, and there's a bit of a late change, ladies and gentlemen. Dan McCarthy couldn't make it, but we have someone just as special as we would hope to have had in the weeks to come, is the candidate for KAP for Mulgrave, Attila Feher-Holan. Attila, welcome, and thank you for joining us on the show.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Now, listen, I must admit, I was very happy to discover that Dan couldn't join us, as excited as I was to have a conversation with Dan. But you're actually the KAP representative that's going to run for the seat that I live in. So it's really exciting for me to be able to talk to somebody that's not a ex-speaker from Brisbane or a representative from the Central Coast of Queensland, somebody that's actually could possibly disrupt the egg cart and make a better representation possible for us here in Mulgrave. So, mate, thank you for taking the time out of your week and evening to join us.
My pleasure. Look forward to it.
Mate, I have to kick off. First things first is, look, I live on the outer skirts of Edmonton, and we've just recently very tragically had a car accident from the corridor between Edmonton and Gordonvale, I believe, and they're arguably upgrading that stretch of road significantly too late than possibly should have, because when we got the letter in the mail only recently to say that they're about to commence this major infrastructure upgrade, that to my surprise and great discovery is the busiest stretch of the Bruce Highway in the whole of Queensland is actually between Edmonton and Gordonvale. So what are your thoughts on the fact that we're a bit delayed in the upgrade of that section of road, as well as the roads in general in the seat of Mulgrave and North Queensland for that matter, as well as, just the tragic state of the Bruce Highway in our area? I mean, it's just a sad state of affairs in many different ways, isn't it?
It is a very sad state of affairs. I've grown up in Cairns most of my life, and I spent a fair bit of time transiting between Innisfail and Cairns while I was working on the farms down there. And to say that it isn't that much different to what it was back in the late 80s, early 90s isn't stretching the truth by that much. The development has been drawn out. I think it was first discussed back in 1999. This plan was first discussed. I think you'll actually find the records. 1958 was the first time there was anything mentioned about making it a dual-lane carriageway in both directions from here to Brisbane. But it's never occurred. This development now has been dragged out over a 20-year period, 21 year, it'll be 23 by the time it's finished. And I was actually caught up in the gridlock when this accident happened. And to see people put through this drama, let alone the tragedy of someone having their life lost, we don't know the circumstances around it, but you can't deny that the road has a great bearing on the amount of accidents we've had just in that short section. The whole section is getting upgraded, and if I refer back to those who were here in 2017, you'll recall there was a bomb threat down near the traffic lights at the service station on the highway just down the road from me. And that was 9 hours of hell for a lot of people. 4 hours to pick up their kids from school or daycares was the average time. We had 5 hours of road closure the other day. Bob and I were discussing it recently about this proposed divergent, you could call it, a second freeway coming into Cairns. It was presented back in 1999, and it hasn't been reviewed since. And everyone keeps referring to it when you bring it up, saying the report said it's not relevant, it's not necessary at this time. But there's been no review on considering or even securing that parcel of land that runs between the cane farms and the inlet mangroves. No one has actually sat down and said, we need to secure that land and make sure it's there just in case, because inevitably Mulgrave is the growth area now. Mulgrave is really the only place left where we can expand and accommodate the necessary land for Cairns growth that we're seeing.
Well, not to mention it's the major artery into the whole Cairns City and northern area and beyond. So it's a bit of a strange affair that they would prolong and prolong and prolong, and only finally in 2020 would they decide to actually do something about it, even if it's not to the greatest extent that should be taken. But
yeah, well, these developments are, you could call them, and it's a term that's used a lot in business, and government seems to like this term. It's called just in time. And for those who aren't aware, a simple example is when you're building a car, all the parts are arriving just in time. So the wheels get to the production line and land there as the vehicle's rolling up to the production line and being put on. And that's a little bit what the government is trying to claim they're doing with these roadworks. But this duplication from Edmonton to Gordonvale isn't just in time. It was necessary minimum 7 to 11 years ago, at the very least.
Well,
and this is where we need to start this forethought.
Forethought indeed, yeah.
Historically, great governments have done great things because they've planned ahead and not thought about their 4-year term or the next term. They've thought about the next generation.
Well, and they always use Bradfield as an example when he was building the Sydney Harbour Bridge, as everybody being confused as to why it was so wide and why it needed to have 4 lanes or 6 lanes when it was first being built. Forethought is everything. I mean, he wasn't a politician. It's probably part of the reason why he had the ability to have that forethought in lots of different ways. But he was given the support, no doubt, from the politicians. I want to mention, too, as a better example of just-in-time distribution and marketing is the toilet paper debacle when COVID first hit. That is a classic example of what you're meaning as just in time, because toilet paper is something that is low value, high volume. It's essentially something that's quite annoying to ship. So it was put in that same category of just supply just in time and everything will work out. Well, it doesn't, does it? It doesn't, and we all saw what happened worldwide on the simple change of distribution of something like toilet paper, how things can go to hell quite quickly. And it when it comes to people's livelihoods, when it comes to picking your children up from daycare or school, it's just not good enough. And we deserve better than that. It doesn't matter if we're in North Queensland or in central Brisbane. So, look, mate, we can only hope that somebody like yourself has the ability to get in there and, say that, hey, don't forget us up in Mulgrave. Don't forget us in North Queensland. And when you think about it, when the Bruce Highway is at its busiest between Edmonton and Gordonvale, it's not something to be forgotten, hey?
Oh, no. I actually spent quite a few years when I was in the services at various major cities. Brisbane and Sydney were 2 of them. And I was even a train driver in Sydney for a time. And I had to drive from Penrith to Sydney CBD. And I can tell you some days sitting in that traffic compared to sitting in the traffic here, and there's no difference. Our commute might be a shorter distance, but that static, stagnant sitting in traffic is something we shouldn't be experiencing up here in Cairns with such a broad, we're such a small city compared to those capitals. We don't get anywhere near the expenditure, even in a ratio per capita, compared to those cities. And that's where the tragedy is, that the money that was meant to be spent on all these upgrades over the years seem to have been filtered out and put off to what they call more important projects.
Well, and arguably too, when you look at when you're driving either way on the highway, especially the one in question that we've been discussing, is when it's Canefield either side predominantly, it begs to differ why it wouldn't be just as easy to either duplicate or increase the amount of lanes, and it would be a lot simpler process than trying to upgrade a road that's between 2 busy sections of the Bruce Highway in the Brisbane area. But I guess that's the whole problem, and that's part of the reason why lots of us think the answer is the creation of a new state, because when there's so many people condensed in small electorates in the Brisbane area, and 70 or so in a 250-kilometre radius, we're outvoted and we're outrepresented. And Attila, I guess that leads me to a great question that would be able to talk about the state of things when it comes to being a representative, which you hope to attain, is how do you feel about the overrepresentation of the small area of the Brisbane CBD and in the 250-kilometre radius around it, compared to, say, the 70-odd seats in central and north Queensland, which you hope to be one of. What are your thoughts? How difficult a task is it going to be once, hopefully, you become a representative to deal with that disparity?
Well, it's going to be a challenge in itself. My nature is one that I'm very stubbornly determined. So on that side, I'm going to make them uncomfortable. I'm just definitely going to make them know what electorate I represent and what we need. But when you consider Cairns is one of the smaller electorates it's just next to Mulgrave. We've got Cairns. It's quite a small electorate. If you compare it to some of the ones in Brisbane, you could walk around it with a cup of coffee and not finish your coffee by the time you've covered that electorate. And that's the unjust thing when you've got Mulgrave, where I am, and Treasure to the west. Those are electorates that you need a couple of days to have any chance of reasonably covering your ground and getting the message across or meeting people. So it shows you how lazy the politicians are down there, that they have these tiny little electorates, and the other side of it too is you will have, just in Brisbane CBD alone, how many members they have where the issues are universal across all of them. Yet, just between Cairns and Mulgrave, the issues are quite different. Yeah, we've got people that work in Cairns or vice versa in Mulgrave, and people that live in Mulgrave work in Cairns. We've got a small set of businesses here. We've got farming. But our needs in Mulgrave are different to Cairns. So that's the big negative on our representation up here and what we really should be getting compared to what we actually are. So you're correct in that. It is going to be one hell of a fight to get what we deserve and need. And as we agree, there's one way to do it, but it's getting that achieved, and that's having a new state.
Well, yes, and look, I guess it's our point to talk about the disillusionment of the fact that we have a representative, a Labor representative, Curtis Pitt, who's a long-standing representative, and his father was a representative before him. But I guess it's easy to see that is a part of the reason of why we have been forgotten, is because if we have Brisbane's man in Mulgrave as opposed to Mulgrave's man in Brisbane, the system is lost to us. And when we already have a disparity of representation from a place like North Queensland to Brisbane CBD, if we have basically a person in the midst that's only going to go down and take orders and bring it back and distribute the information accordingly, it's not in our best interest. It's not in the best interest of the whole community at large, nor the growth and prosperity of the greater area of North Queensland. We can only hope people like yourself have the ability to tip the apple cart when it comes to that sort of mindset. For lots of these big party representatives like Curtis, bless his heart, as good as a job as he might think he does, it is a simple fact. When it comes to people, LNP or Labor, if they're taking orders and bringing them back, it's not in our best interests. And we can only hope, mate, that you can do well against that.
Well, I've certainly made it clear, and the KAP has definitely enabled me to be this way, is I've made it clear, and I remind them regularly, that on our core values and principles, number one is clearly written there. Number one is the important one, and that's that the member, that's me, represents the electorate of Mulgrave first and foremost for what's most important for the people and on my conscience. So that's the first thing, and it just follows up with, as long as it meets the core values and principles below, and it follows through with all those. Now, those core values and principles are pretty much universal for any Australian. So it's already clearly stated in my dossier that this is what I'm here to do, represent Mulgrave. I'm not coming in on my father's name. I'm here on my own name, standing as someone who's worked pretty darn hard his entire life, served proudly, and decided enough is enough. It's time that the people who are supposed to be heard have someone that's willing to listen to them and hear them.
And that's what lots of electorates in the North Queensland and Central Queensland area need. And Look, I find it quite fitting. I want to I want to go off not our sitting representative, but a perspective from the other big party, because I only got home this evening and quickly checked the letterbox before I rushed into the house, and I happened to have a letter distributed about the upcoming election and how I can post my vote, and it was thanks to our local representative from the Liberal National Party, which no doubt it's getting returned to them to be able to see if I wanted to make my postal vote or not. And I have no idea who the candidate is. I won't even bother saying his name, but I have no idea who he is. I've never seen him before. I've never met him. I've never seen him in the community. And my point is this is how they treat the voter. It's a lowest common denominator. And while we're at it, we might just spend all this money distributing letters to find out the percentage of Mulgrave that might make a postal vote. We're not necessarily worried about the good representative to get elected. They could have spent the money accordingly for his advertising, but they're more inclined to try and get as much information about postal voting instead. This is what we have to put up with.
We need to clarify for the audience.
Yeah.
We need to clarify the audience. Can you tell us now? It's got a postal vote form in there, and that's the official Electoral Commission of Queensland postal form, isn't it?
Correct. Yes.
The official post. Yep, that's the registration form. Now, where is the envelope addressed to?
Well, and this is where I was starting to lean towards, because I've seen another post from a representative running down in central Queensland, and it's the same premise. It's not going straight back to the Electoral Commission's office down in Queensland, no doubt. It is going to probably a LNP headquarters where they can gather information and data about who and what are going to do what voting patterns from particular areas. And my point is as wrong as that is in my mind, as it would be in most people's mind, is fancy not trying to devote the power and energy into putting their man in Mulgrave, to try and get him elected. Instead, the disdain is, let's just try and gather as much information as we can anyway, and what will happen will happen. It's a completely backwards process, and I guess this is just the way the big parties are. All the more power to the minor parties like KAP and all the others, One Nation, to say, look, we're all about representing our people, and we're taking it the other way around, because it's utterly absurd.
Well, if we take the gloves off a little bit for this subject, I noted very carefully about a month ago on one of the TV channels when they were talking to the LNP actually said they're dedicating all their time and resources to Cairns and Barron River. And that shows you again the disdain they have for Mulgrave, which a lot of people in politics consider the low-end demographic of Cairns not worth the time. And that's what I hope to stop, is because I live in White Rock, and as someone who lives in Mulgrave would know what White Rock represents to Cairns. And I tell you what, I'm proud to be in White Rock, and I'm proud to be around these people that I live with. They're lovely families, some of them struggling, some of them don't give a damn, some of them working hard to get somewhere, but they all have something in common. They're proud to be Australian, and they're proud to be where they are. And this is something we need to get across to those major parties, is that you just can't come here, score a seat, and then treat us with contempt because there's other areas that are more important. And the current member, his pitiful effort on TV at the moment of spending all the last 2 weeks in Cairns campaigning for things for Cairns and Barron River alongside his counterparts. But not once on the media has he presented anything of real benefit for Mulgrave.
Well, and this is right. And Attila, I can tell you now, as a person who's avidly committed to trying to educate and convince the general population of central North Queensland that the future for our regions is to become a new state. I can avidly tell you the day that I saw the member for Mulgrave, it was only recently, probably within 12 months or 18 months ago, on a newscast being asked the question of, do you think there should be at least the question asked of whether we should be a new state? He said, I think anybody who supports that notion should take a good hard look at themselves. As a sitting representative, to be so dismissive, it only proves the disdain that these big parties have for the local regions and communities of North Queensland, that they just completely dismissive because they have that power. They have that power and voter base from Brisbane and the CBD and surrounding area of southern and southeast Queensland.
Yeah.
And we need to change the vote. I want to lead on to another question now, Attila, and it's about that representation, but the next level is, what do yourself, should you prove successful in being elected the member of Mulgrave in the upcoming election, and should hopefully KAP do well in any form of way, what do you guys plan to do should you hold any form of balance of power? Will you hold the big parties, whoever comes begging to help make government, will you hold them accountable, and will you try and actually utilise that balance of power to really get things moving for Central North Queensland? Fundamentally, will you guys seriously consider the question for trying to force the Commission into looking into the new state? What are your thoughts?
Okay. I'll answer each of those on their individual levels,
sure,
because there's a few questions in there. Now, the first one is, when I get elected, it's to represent Mulgrave first and foremost. As I said, it's the core values. We've got a serious problem with crime, specifically juvenile crime, which surprisingly is around 50-50 of all offences in the region. We really need to focus on local workers for local contracts, whether it be large developments or supply. We need it to be local, and my hope is that we can have rings like a ripple in the water, where if there's a project happening in Mulgrave, the tenders are first sought in Mulgrave. Where they can't be filled from Mulgrave, we source from the surrounding electorate. Where they can't be filled there, we go to the next. So we're, as much as possible, using local people, local companies, local machinery, and local resources. And I'm not an environmentalist, but it makes sense on that level as well, because you're reducing transport costs.
Yes, exactly.
Travelling and all that other associated. The other side to that is we need to really start looking, and I've mentioned it before, looking to the future. Planning now for the growth. I don't want to see another development go up, but no proper transport corridor or planning in that resource. We need confidence. And how do we get confidence back in the region? You need good government that's planning ahead, showing businesses and entrepreneurs that if you invest here in jobs and growing a business, it'll be worth it. So that's that side of the question.
No, that's
the other side
answer,
is when it comes to representation, whether it be that we have the balance of power or not, I will be making sure they know who I am. I will be making sure they know what Mulgrave wants, and I will be making it very uncomfortable for them until such time as they do provide us with our needs and provide us with our wants. It's too easy to go down there and fall for the trap and, become someone's buddy and that. I'm not interested in making friends down there. It's not my job to go down to make friends. My job is to go down there with people's voices ringing in my ears on what they want and they demand. And I want to make sure I can resonate that very clearly to the members down there. They won't be able to hide from me, I can tell you. I know there's a few bums squirming in their seats in the last couple of months since I was endorsed, and I'm glad they're squirming because they need to. There's no such thing as a safe seat, and I'm going to prove that here once and for all because we've had enough of it. When it comes to separating the state, I'll go back before I joined the forces. I was living up here before I joined.
Yeah.
And I wasn't too keen on the idea of splitting the state. But since coming back here with the family and seeing the state we're in, there is no way you could justify what's happening between the north and the south. And to separate us from them isn't just separating a state, it's separating a whole mindset because we are very different in needs, wants and nature compared to down there. They're interested in their big city high-rises and massive public transport and condensed living. The people up here want the freedoms that come with living in the north. And until we get representation that understands that need for the families of the future, we're never going to get the full fruits of our labour.
No, and well said, mate, because the full fruits of our labour is something that's being taken for granted for the fact that there's people avidly receiving revenue from the regions, especially when it comes to simple things like the coal mining revenue, and we're not seeing even a 15th of that return in things like the upgrading of roads and even the simple infrastructure to help our communities grow, to help them flourish, because if a community can be invested in for something like the Cross River Rail, it's such a significant investment where such a significant portion of the state will never actively use or undertake or seek to use. There's a huge disparity, and when you consider that there's no investment of that nature going on into the Central and North Queensland regions, the mind boggles. And if we could only take the future into our own hands and make the decisions that would affect us most, just think of the things that we could do, and we could think far ahead of the future instead of just into the next election cycle. So it's exciting.
Actually, I'll refer to what. Can I interrupt?
No, of course, go mate.
You mentioned about a year ago how the current member mentioned about these, that thinking about a separate state is madness and his justification of terms. He actually did bring it up recently as well, if you weren't aware. During the COVID crisis and the border lockdowns, and when we had Yarrabah locked up from us, there were a few people up here asking for a border to separate us from down south who had certain number of the cases there. And there was discussion about and promoting of a quarantine border somewhere in central Queensland to separate us so we could continue to at least have an economy. And the current member and a few others in his party said, no, we can't do that because that might encourage them to actually keep a border. So even in a sense of something that could have helped us here in North Queensland, they refuse to just because it might hint that a border makes sense. That's how far they are against it.
And that's the example of the Brisbane's man in Mulgrave as opposed to Mulgrave's man in Brisbane, because it's not about what's good for us. It's about trying to maintain that the one shoe size fits all in the whole great state of Queensland. And with $100 billion on the chalkboard, and with a significant lack of investment in the Central and North Queensland regions for the portion of that debt, the mind boggles as to why any representative worth their weight in gold wouldn't even consider asking the question of whether it's viable, or wouldn't even entertain the idea of whether or not we could stand on our own 2 feet. The fact that it could be dismissed so easily from a big party representative, in my mind, is only a detriment to the character of that person and the want and the need of betterment of their community. So, Attila, in the front of trying to topple over the current representative of Mulgrave, we wish you luck, because anything would be better than the current state of affairs, but you would be a far superior candidate in many different ways. I guess we should go on to another topic, because KAP have many different policies, and look, in the last week I've been starting to keep an eye on many of the candidates that you guys are starting to field, and look, we could talk about Mulgrave till the cows come home as well, but what's the team's thoughts on the greater prosperity for the North Queensland area? Because it seems that you guys have managed to find some fantastic candidates, including yourself, to try and represent many electorates in the whole North Queensland area. Have you guys spoken much about what you guys want to achieve going forward post the 2020 election?
We were actually had an opportunity to gather together shortly after our endorsement. We met up in Townsville to get to know each other a little bit, get some PR work done, some photo work done. And there were two things I noted. The first and most important one was there wasn't a single career politician amongst them. They weren't born, trained and bred to be yes men to a party. They're all hard-working men and women who have either provided services within the community or worked in the mining industry, on the farms. So we all have that connection, and we bonded so well because we were a group of people that got together for a common fight and a common cause. When it comes to core values and policies and what we hope to achieve in each electorate, we had all different sorts of plans and goals, But when you look at each of those, whether it be Kieran in the Whitsunday and him wanting to get that rodeo stand set up and get it up and running and really high level international, or Tanika up in Cook about the services there, we all had very similar goals, and that's infrastructure. Real strong, stable, strong infrastructure and development, protection of our primary and secondary industries, that's another common one, and almost every single electorate has the same issue when it comes to crime. That's especially for between Townsville, Cairns and Mount Isa. It's like the triangle of death when it comes to these kids. So the biggest one is that primary and secondary industry, and we're losing that term. Everyone's referring to manufacturing or their farming. In the end, it's a classic term of primary and secondary industry, and there's a reason why it's called primary and secondary, because without it there is no tertiary. So they're the common grounds that we have, but as I said, we all have our specific needs for each electorate that are tied in through those areas.
Yes, and
Can I just jump in there?
Of course you can. Well, I think we're going to start talking about crime. But Bill, do you want to?
That's where I was going. Julian Wood was is for Farangara down in Townsville. I think she was Take Back Townsville. I think was her group.
Correct.
You've got a history there with the Safe Nights, so you've got something in common in there. There's some other groups. So I think there's a Jeff Adams, and it's something like One Standard for All Citizens or something like that. There, and then they've got CJAG as well here, Crime Justice Action Group, and I think there was also the Cairns Regulators. Now, there seems to be a multitude of these groups around, or has been. It's really be good if someone could pull all those together and sort of get them organised where they're acting more as one. We did have a situation back in April. I think Mitch Meyer, that it was going to be a big protest at the court at the courthouse or something like that.
I recall that, during that case.
And I think it got up to at least about 800 people had registered to attend when COVID sort of hit and smashed that idea. And I think COVID has actually been a bit of a saving grace for the incumbent government in regards to it has stopped a lot of these groups from getting their campaigns off the ground, not just in crime, but I think also you've got the green shirts and the farmers and things like that. It's hard to get back on the road to campaign against the incumbent government with policies and that. And
I think I can answer your question on that. I already know where you're going with it, the question that you're going to ask. And firstly, we've got so many different groups because each group is targeting the issue of crime and youth crime in a unique way, where my group is about patrolling the suburbs that we live in and being a little bit of a stopgap between Neighbourhood Watch and the police, a bit of a fill-in there. You've got the Crime Justice Action Group, which are about lobbying and publicity. And then you've got the regulators who are about capturing the information that's on social media and making it public. So we've got all these groups, but what we've lacked, and it's one thing I hope to achieve once elected, is to be willing to say to these guys, okay, let's meet up and organise an official government meeting with your representative and bring all your cards, lay them on the table and show us what your wants and needs are for each group and what we can come up with to resolve this and how it would tie in with one of CATA's policies, which is the relocation sentencing. So, and that's something that all these groups have lacked, is a politician who's willing to sit down with them and listen to them, and not just, as I've experienced in my time in Cairns Safe Nights, where you get called in there to be told that you don't know how it works in government, to which I responded, they obviously don't know how it works here for the people on the ground. And they don't really listen to you. They just give you the appeasement of having a chance to be seen with them, but the conversation dies the moment the books are closed and people walk out the door. It isn't carried on their shoulder as a representative of the electorate and taken with them to Parliament. Because, as has been mentioned so many times, once they get down there, there are a set rules and regulations that they must abide by if they're to have any hope of, and as we know, most politicians, when they get into those big parties, their only aspiration is the big bucks. How can they fill their back pocket the quickest? And to present to Brisbane the serious issue of crime we have would be it would be detrimental to their career within the party. So they shut their mouth and toe the line.
I think the other thing is too, I don't think Brisbane actually has the stomach to enact the things that needed, because they're dealing with about 2.5 million voters down there that they've got to take in consideration their sensitivities of all these sort of issues, human rights and all that, the old do-gooder sort of syndrome, which is okay for them because they're not faced with it on a daily basis. So I don't think it's going to ever be possible for Brisbane, a Parliament in Brisbane, to write rules, regulations and laws that, while satisfying the sensitivities of the people in southeast Queensland, address the real problems here. I think that's one of the real problems. They just can't do it because it would hurt them too much in those sensitive inner city electorates and urban areas.
We forget and this is something that politicians have convinced us. They've convinced us that they can please everybody. Well, the fact is you can't please everybody all the time. And to be a politician, to be a representative, you have to have the stamina and the stubborn strength to say, this must be done, let's do it. Now, I'm not saying ignore the noisy minority. You can't ignore the noisy minority because you're being as bad as the politicians who ignore us up here. But what you can do is help people realise there are times where to get balance, you need to step on toes sometimes, whether it be the do-gooders with these kids and trying to let them get away with everything while stomping on someone who does the right thing and defends their property. These are all issues where we need to make it clear that we're not ignoring the do-gooders. We've got to make it clear to them there are certain times where you have to provide discipline and you have to deprive people of certain liberties because of their actions. It's not just for the sake of depriving their liberty. Depriving your liberty and discipline is a road towards a better citizen instead of a revolving door criminal.
Well, and as both of you being ex-servicemen, I'm sure you can attest to the fact that a little bit of discipline only does the soul well, yeah?
Well, the thing with the military is it is slightly different because the military,
of course,
they break you to make you, which we can't do in society.
No, of course
you could never do that in society. But there is a similarity there where you do the wrong thing, you wear the punishment. And they were very creative with their punishments. But we already have seen, if you've been up here from the early 80s, 90s, you would have seen there is a system that does work. It's been proven. That system has been updated and upgraded to a newer, broader and more targeted system of breaking the cycle of crime, taking these youth away from their environment, which can't, to be honest, a lot of these juveniles are in a horrible environment, taking them out of that, taking them out of the bad influences and instilling in them the confidence and self-discipline to become a productive member of society and then return to our society and not fall back into it.
And contribute in many ways more than they could ever could dream, yes. Yeah.
Well, a lot of these kids, people go on about, it's horrible. A lot of these kids I still know today who are now grown-ups with their own kids going up there to meet old man, to get some of what they had when they were growing up, to instill in them the importance of being a good member of society, productive and family orientated. That's a big part.
Definitely.
Good families make good children, make a good future.
Look, just to finish on that, especially when it comes to the KAP policy, when it comes to relocation sentencing, before I go to you, Bill, where you can make your comment, I just wanted to read it out from the KAP website, actually, and it's just entitled A Serious Plan to Break the Crime Cycle. Crime is a huge problem in regional Queensland. The traditional sentencing and incarceration laws are not working, particularly for young offenders. I think we covered that quite well. I'll continue. So magistrates currently only have two options when dealing with an offender: send them to jail or put them straight back into the community. KAP's relocation sentencing policy would give them another option. Magistrates could be able to send offenders to a remote approved property. They would work on the land to learn the life skills and become better society members. This would give offenders, particularly young offenders, a chance to break the offending cycle before they become professional criminals while still keeping the community safe. I think that encapsulated quite well there on the KAP website, and we've definitely covered that. You've made that point very clear, and look, it's straightforward enough. And as you say, it's something that's been tried and tested in many different ways in the past, but obviously the KAP think that it's something that we should revisit. Bill, what was your point that you wanted to make out?
Well, I just like to point out with the two major parties and their attitudes towards crime and trying to make it dissipate a bit, I think their attitude is more they're quite content to let us be perpetual victims rather than sort of really address the problems. And the other thing I just noticed too, the government's also just introduced laws to allow prisoners with less than 3 years sentences to vote in the election for the first time. Now, my understanding for a lot of people go to jail for quite serious offences and hardly get 3 years. So a lot of these prisoners will be fairly serious criminals in regards to now that they can cast their vote in the election. Does that concern you a little bit, Attila?
It's not really a concern. A lot of people would say that, well, that's a policy that benefits the Labor Party. Well, it doesn't really benefit the Labor Party because the Labor Party are the ones that have put them in there in the first place. You could point to, but it's one thing to do that, and my view on it is you have a disdain for society and committed, in some cases, serious offences, and you have been taken out of society because you are unsafe to society, you're a danger, or whatever else the reason is for you being there. Therefore, your right to influence the future should be taken too, because you have to learn to be part of society and be reintroduced into society before you can have a say and influence on what's happening. So it's a negative for a lot of parties. The Labor may think it's good for them, but I can't see that. I think it being detrimental because a big part of the Labor Party is, and all the other majors.
Well, I guess
they represent what they used to.
You could also argue
I
that
just see
it
it
works
as
in their benefit because if the Labor Party is traditionally in the last little while soft on crime, I suppose you'd want to vote for them if you only got 3 years instead of 7.
Yeah. Well, that's what a lot of people point to and suspect that's why it was brought in.
I don't necessarily
I think
agree with that
that,
sentiment. I was more saying it in jest, but it's still it's a point that could be made.
It is. It could be, yes.
Yeah, Bill, what was your thoughts?
But how many of those are actually going to vote a proper vote and not do a donkey vote anyway?
Of course, yes.
I look at more as another thing, basically, just giving the victims another kick in the guts. Like,
exactly.
You're a victim of crime. The perpetrators don't get a reasonable sentence. You don't get any restitution from them, and it just goes. And you can expect another visit sometime later and be a victim again. It's it's just like the victims don't matter, but the criminals do, if you know what I mean. Something's got to give somewhere along the line. That's all.
I'm curious as to where their registered electorate is. Do they vote in the seat of Lotus Glen, or do they vote in the seat of where they'd otherwise be living?
Actually, never thought of that one either. Yeah. Because it's supposed to be where you reside. Yeah. It's supposed to be where you reside and you're registered to vote.
Exactly right.
So their residence.
The mind boggles how
that is a good point. But the other side of it too with crime, perpetuating crime is a business in itself. It's a business that gives the government the ability to enforce on us more laws. Those laws that aren't actually used to target the criminals, but used against the average citizen who may occasionally have a little slip up. So we're being swamped by law after law after law, but there is no positive effect on the cycle of crime, whether it be drugs, whether it be corporate, whether it be low-level basic crime or opportunistic crime. It hasn't really changed it. These laws all they've done is stifled people from going about their daily lives or encroached on their privacy. That's all that's been achieved. And for a big government that wants control and wants to have more power to provide the will of the southeast corner, what better way?
Yes, and look, I guess they keep us busy with the fact that crime is running so rampant in the regions, and while we're busy trying to yell and scream at the fact that our kids are running riot and stealing cars left, right, and centre, and do you know what? It was only the start of the week this week. One of my work colleagues came to work. His partner is 4 weeks out from giving birth to their first child, and he was just talking about an incident on the road as he turned into the driveway of where we work, and he got a call 15 minutes later that his partner had gone out and the car was gone. And being 4 weeks pregnant, she said, I better check around the corner in case I've parked it there and forgotten. But obviously checked. And like to her credit, she was in utter disbelief apparently. And lo and behold, the car was missing, and they'd gone into the house in the evening and taken the keys off where they store them near the kitchen. And this was while they were asleep. And this is the usual story that we're starting to hear on too frequent a basis, and it has to stop. Yeah. And look, policy after policy can be said about how we might be able to solve our young children from going down the path of crime. Lord knows every teenager no doubt has that series of boredom where they have the ability to turn left or right, but we need to be able to make them turn to the right. And look, when it comes to crime, as opposed to a responsive way of dealing with this, is how do we create opportunities for them? How do we keep them from being bored teenagers knowing, well, I don't know what I'm going to do after school, because there's no NQEA trades apprenticeships going like there used to be 30 years ago. There's not necessarily that manufacturing sector in the northern area of Queensland like there used to be. How do we solve the problem of our youth being into this situation instead of just trying to create great policies to respond to it? Because all I know is if there was 25 representatives that was just from the central and north Queensland regions that dealt with the policy making to deal with the youth of our regions, to not go down these paths, I think we would have far greater success than the representatives that represent the far off southeast corner to deal with it. So Look, relocation sentencing is one facet of that, and look, it'd be interesting to see how successful KAP is with that, you guys yourself. But otherwise, mate, as somebody that's an ex-serviceman, the implementation of discipline as well as through your safe nights work, it's just a problem that's got to stop. If not just for the community at large, for the future of our young people, hey?
Yeah. Well, this saying that they're doing it because they're bored, that is the do-gooders' war cry.
Oh, yes.
If you're out there and you meet these kids, and I've met, and I can tell you, 85% of the kids I met out on the streets at night, they are there because they are escaping a home that's either drugs, alcohol, or abuse, and they don't want to be home. So they're out in the street just wandering harmlessly, but then they run into this group of kids who are up to no good. They feel accepted, they feel welcome, they feel loved, and they take onto that and they latch onto it and they end up falling into that group. Boredom, seriously, there was nothing that the kids have now that we had when we grew up.
Well, exactly.
But we knew how to entertain ourselves. And okay, sometimes, I know, speaking from my own experience, I was a cheeky little bugger sometimes, and I had to get a boot from the corner shop man or the Mr. Policeman. But yeah, you had that fear and respect for your elders, and that side has not been taught. You hear people screaming about how the parents need to be held accountable. Well, how can a parent be held accountable when they cannot even tell their 12-year-old to go to your room because it's against the law, it's a deprivation of liberty, and if that kid rings up the coppers, they have to answer the call. Okay, most of the time you get the coppers and a lot of the police are good, and they really try and support the parents in this dilemma. But the fact is, these kids know the law and know or think they know their rights well enough to get away with this stuff. So the discipline side of it is it needs to be provided in the home first, and we need to be able to give parents the ability and the right to discipline. And when we talk about discipline, the certain groups always yell abuse, abuse, abuse when you talk about discipline. But discipline is a broad spectrum. And discipline is not abuse, because a discipline is done through love and care, where abuse is just from anger. So
well, of course.
There's a very big difference.
And there could be significant change for the better at the end of disciplinary actions as opposed to abusive ones.
Well, I'll tell you something now that not many people know, but I was one of those kids on the wrong path when I was growing up. And I was very quickly steered onto the right path because I had people around me that gave a damn. Not just my parents, but other people around me, friends and relatives, who actually gave a damn and wanted to make sure that I didn't fall into that trap. And if it wasn't for those around me that cared, who knows where I would have ended up. So I speak from not only someone who wants to lead the electorate and our nation into a direction of rectifying this problem, but from experience, from being on the other side, being the little scallywag that needed a good proverbial boot up the arse.
Well, mate, and all the more reason people with that sort of experience of, I guess, the mild sense of misspent youth, especially from people who are born and bred and raised in the regions, to be able to deal with the problems that they see their own now young people facing, because it's certainly not going to be solved by bureaucrats from the southeast corner. It's not going to be solved by anybody sitting in the Tower of Power in Brisbane, and it's only up to us to be able to respond and actively deal with it in the best way we see possible in the way that we live here, which is not the same way that people live down in the southeast corner. Bill, I sense that you wanted to make a comment before. And gentlemen, I must say that we're coming up to an hour, so I might wrap things up sometime soon, just so we don't impart too much into the evening of Attila. So go, Bill.
Yeah, I just want to change the subject a little bit in regards to the green tinging of the LNP and look-alike Labor. And I think just recently the LNP have basically come out and sort of downplayed the need for coal-fired power stations and sort of pushing away from that. Now, that's pretty surprising. They're sort of giving coal, it looks like they're going to give coal a bit of bash. I mean, they're quite happy to take $4 or $5 billion of royalties down the southeast corner to keep paying off their bloody $100 billion of credit debt. But they seem to come out and give the old coal industry a bit of a thumping every while. I find it quite hypocritical that on one hand they're only too happy to channel all the money down to the southeast corner for paying for infrastructure down there, and at the same time trying to belittle the people in central and North Queensland who make a living in the coal industry and the coal-fired power stations. Now, I notice that's a bit of a difference with the KAP in regards to trying to get energies onto a level playing field in regards to the renewables, the cheapest form of electricity there is, versus coal-fired power. How do you see it going forward?
We have to just look historically. First of all, you've got this new energy coming up, this upcoming energy of solar and wind, and it's being developed and progressed. We've had a huge leap forward in solar panels, for example. Now they're currently around the 20% efficient. Now that's the amount of energy it receives to how much it converts to electricity. It was sitting around 12%, and it was actually a Queensland professor that made the leap forward in this generation ability to get us up to around 20%, and we've just passed that mark again. Now, this energy source is progressing and improving dramatically. We should be allowing this technology to permeate through our industries, our homes, our businesses, and our government at a natural rate, because there are a lot of benefits to naturally letting it progress. It's a bit like back in the day, a computer that was worth $3,000 just a few years ago is only worth a few hundred now because technology has developed. We should be looking at it the same way with this solar and wind. As it progresses, the earlier technology becomes more affordable, more available, and we can progressively upgrade. Forcing through grants a sudden dumping of this sort of electricity generation is actually pushing the price artificially up and not really benefiting everyone, because all it's done now is lifted our power costs to such a ridiculously high level compared to where it really should be going back 15 years ago when this push started.
I think one of the things there is once you start subsidising anything and making the industry comfortable, like you could equate it to the Australian car industry. When you started subsidising and protecting that, I mean, if it wasn't for a breakdown of competition and Japanese cars coming, we'll probably be driving around in Feher-Holans with drum brakes and something, because there's no incentive to improve your product. So that's where subsidising and giving guaranteed tariffs allows the industry not to sort of put its best foot forward for improving and developing. But in regards to...
that's our argument, is that, and one of the things we've been saying in KAP is if it's so affordable and so profitable and so good, if they're talking about coal...
Davo, what are you doing?
Yeah, and then I just tried to get in. I didn't mean to start the music. Sorry, continue your thought, Attila.
Yeah. They're talking about how bad coal is. Well, if you're saying coal is bad, there's only one other option right now to keep our industry moving and our nation growing, and that's nuclear. So if you can't accept nuclear, forget about arguing against coal. We're getting entertainment. So Yeah, we need the base load power. We need something there that's stable and strong. And until such time that we have another viable option that is consistently performing well day and night, peak and non-peak, we have to continue to provide the coal. And to have coal-fired power stations here is a great boost for Queensland economy, because we can export our power to those states that have shut theirs down and now have the most unstable power in the planet.
Well, we
exactly.
do actually make a few bob out of selling our generator capacity, because Queensland typically can produce about a gigawatt or more power than it actually needs at any time, and quite often is selling down to the south. Yeah. But I mean, it all depends if the sun's shining or the wind's blowing. But the coal's always there to sort of help out when needed.
Yes.
So that's the other thing. I think the other big point about solar and wind is I don't think there's enough attention given to. I don't think anyone's yet got a disposal policy in regards to how they're going to get rid of these things after their time of life, because typically both wind and solar only have a 20-year life of type, which is a third of that of a coal-fired power
actually,
station.
wind has a 100-year, but it needs a 25-year cycle of upgrades. So every 25 years it needs a major upgrade. But yeah, it's a 100-year life cycle on a wind turbine. But those upgrades are major. You're talking
you might as well build
same
another
cost
one,
of actually building it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's pretty hard to do when a lot of, like in Europe, a lot of them out at sea. They reckon the actual servicing and the ones, the sea, offshore ones are horrific. But we already got a lot of decommissioned wind farms in North America and in Europe, and they are posing a bit of a challenge in regards to disposal. But I think solar panels are even a bigger problem because of a lot of the rare earths that are in them, and what we do with those panels after they're finished with. And there's a lot of them, billions of them.
It's a spot on point you presented, Bill, because we're up to, year 16 of the major push for 16 years ago was the start of the big push. So we're looking in another 9 years or less, because solar panels weren't as efficient back then. So about 9 years or less, where we're going to start seeing these panels coming off roofs left, right and centre.
Exactly.
And where are they going to go? How are we going to recycle them? Because recycling needs a lot of energy. And we can't recycle if we can't afford to. Because there's got to be, a business isn't going to recycle if it's running at a loss.
Well, you could boost up the nearest coal-fired power station to get the energy requirements to recycle a solar panel. Wouldn't that be the
You need coal-fired power stations to recycle. So if you want to be green, you've got to have our coal.
The greenest thing you can do is to not have a solar panel. Yeah, isn't that an absurd thing? Yeah. Look, I guess the component is, and I'm going to go back to the point of subsidies for these. And I must apologise about my cutout, Jen. My headphones just went dark. So I love the example that Alan Jones uses frequently and has done since he was just recently retired on his radio show. Was you got two bakers and they're in the same suburb, 20 minutes away from each other, and they're both baking bread. If you're going to give one baker the ability through subsidy to make his bread cheaper, then it's not a fair market. It's the simplest way to be able to say, you can't tell me that the cost of the power generated from something like a solar panel or a wind turbine, when it's subsidised by the taxpayer, you can't tell me that power is as clean and just as the power that's coming out of a coal-fired power station without any subsidy. And the ramifications of the simple fact of that matter is if it could stand on its own 2 feet, why doesn't it do it? And I think you covered that quite nicely in your comment just before, Attila.
But there are also emissions. We're not talking about, there's suddenly this worldwide mass demand for wind and solar, and it's an artificial demand. It's not a natural demand. So we have to get this stuff produced en masse in a short period of time, causing actually a dramatic increase in our emissions, where if we steadily and slowly increased our solar and wind power generation at a steady, even, consistent rate,
and improve it as it went.
We wouldn't have this sudden demand to pump out greenhouse gases to hopefully fix a problem. You're basically tipping the scales too far one way when you want them to tip the other way.
And those horrible greenhouse gases, CO2, is actually plant food that's greening the planet. Very surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess
that's a whole
when it
separate
comes,
issue. Yeah.
There's a few different ways to attack it, and the simple fact is, if the Queensland government in any tenure of election period wants to commit economic suicide by phasing out coal-fired power stations when we've got the highest grade quality coal that the rest of the world wants, at the very least, they can't afford to stop shipping it to the other countries that need it, because we can't afford to not have that income coming in. So why we wouldn't burn it ourselves and have the highest quality coal, cleanest quality coal burning in our own power generators that's absolutely absurd.
Yeah. Now, I'm one of those strange ones. I confuse people because I'm for coal-fired power stations, that we still need them. That no matter how you look at it, what side you're on, logically coal-fired. But on the same instance, our home has been off-grid, no electricity from the grid for 2.5 years. So we're completely off-grid solar and battery. But, I'm this person that's off-grid, not hooked up, not drawing the power, but I see the need for this affordable energy source to help our industries grow, especially at this time where our businesses and our industry, primary and secondary, are being crushed with restrictions.
That's exactly right. Yes, and the power demands on a shed that might have a high capacity for manufacturing obviously can have all the solar it wants, but it won't be able to keep up with the demand of what is required. The individual households, sure, Attila, I think we're all on the same boat when it comes to Central and North Queensland, and both the abundance of water and the abundance of the sun. I think we can all agree that everyone could do their part when it comes to, especially when it's the home, when it's just keeping the TVs and the lights on and the kettle boiling. I think we all can definitely say, look, that makes a lot of sense. But when it comes to the major infrastructure possibilities for the future of Central and North Queensland, I think we all understand the premise of that baseload power being a necessity. Yeah, it's refreshing to hear people that don't shy away from the fact that they can declare that it's important, and the industry is important. And look, the future may hold what it brings, but for the time and the here and the now, the logical sense is, why disrupt so immediately and cause such economic harm and job losses when it comes to the fact that it's still necessary. There's developing economies that need this.
There's the hypocrisy of it all too. Yeah. The loudest screamers of green policy and environmental live in the most polluted or polluting area, and that's the southeast corner.
It is ironic, isn't it?
The greatest demand and the biggest harm to our environment comes from that southeast corner, but they're the ones dictating to our farmers and us that live up here in this relatively clean, fresh region that we should be changing our ways to suit their posture.
Well, exactly. We could, and look, if we had another hour of the show, Attila, but I guess we should really get you back to your family and to bed so you can continue on with your work life, and as well as campaign avidly for the next few weeks. So I guess we could talk to the cows come home about southeast Queensland electorates and not just things like the Green vote dictating to how farmers should farm their land, who already have the best practices in the world. It would open up a whole other can of worms. But Attila, did you have any finishing thoughts and anything you'd like to say if someone listening is like myself, who's a member of Mulgrave, and the change that you're looking to bring to North Queensland and the seat of Mulgrave?
Well, we've got a few simple phrases we use, and one of the most common ones is, I'm working for you. And it's as simple as that. I'm working for Mulgrave. And what benefits Mulgrave will benefit the state. And the other thing is, I'm not just a nice guy. I'm the right guy for the job. That's as simple as that. I'm here to fight for you guys. I'm here to fight beside you because I'm here, feet on the ground, experienced what you've experienced, whether it be struggling to make a week go by and get your bills paid and survive, to a business owner, to a serviceman, to a volunteer in the SES. It's an all-encompassing project. It's a life cause. There's no greater electorate to represent and fight for the Mulgrave, because it is such a unique electorate.
Yes, look, and we can only hope that yourself for the seat of Mulgrave, as well as the KAP as a party in general for North Queensland, off the topic of a new state and what you guys could do with the hung parliament, we can only hope that you guys, like yourself, bring the commitment and enthusiasm for the community at large of Mulgrave, that you could bring that and rejuvenate what could be great representation for the electorate, mate. So I'd like to say good luck, and I'm sure lots of our viewers would like to say good luck in trying to bring that commitment to the community at large. So we wish you well on that endeavour.
Thank you so much.
That's always. Well, I guess we will wrap things up. Bill, did you have any finishing thoughts you'd like to say, or a final sort of question?
No, I wish Attila all the best in the upcoming election. I think the people of Mulgrave need a change down there. They're sort of been getting the very little out of their current situation, and I suppose having this, Curtis was the treasurer, and I don't think we got too much out of him up here in the north, and now he's the speaker. You get nothing.
The Labor Party is obviously very comfortable with the seat of Mulgrave, and it should not be the case. It should be the case that the Treasurer of the state would be able to have delivered significantly more, and it just proves of the fact that we're lacking in infrastructure that it's not the case.
Well, they're voting on a legacy, and the last legacy, I'll say with hand in the air, he was good, and we were hoping for the same. The electorate of Mulgrave was hoping for the same, but it was shown lacking right from the word go.
Yeah.
And namesake.
We hope that changes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I guess that'll bring this evening's show to a wrap, gentlemen. Thank you very much, Attila, for your time this evening, as well as taking time out of your busy week, which is no doubt hectic, coming up to the state election very soon. So thank you again.
Thank you. Have a good night.
And I must impart a special request, if I could, because I was about to do a spiel for our sister podcast hosted by Matt Maloney, who's acquainted with Robbie Catter. If you're speaking to Robbie anytime soon, if you could pass on Matt's regards and say if you want to come on to the Northern Vibe show, he'd request that you could do that for him.
I'll do that. No problem.
Thanks I'm sure that's a big thank you from Matt Maloney, Attila. So look, if anybody would like to learn more from about Attila and the guys from KAP who have a large suite of people running for Central and North Queensland electorates, you can visit the kap.org.au website where you can learn more about their policy and representatives like Attila. If you'd like to learn more about Boot Brisbane and the campaign to create a new state for Central and North Queensland, you can visit bootbrisbane.com, where you can learn more about how there is historical components and the facets in which a new state could be created to increase the representation of Central and North Queensland, as well as better our federal representation. Likewise, you can follow us on Facebook at bootbrisbane.com, and thank you, and follow Yes to a North Queensland State, another Facebook page on the same premise of campaigning for better representation for North Queensland. So with that, on Monday nights, you can listen to Matt Maloney, hopefully sometime soon, interviewing Robbie Catter, and you can have an amazing listen to a fantastic host like we have this evening with Attila. So thank you and good evening, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah. See you later.